Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on another episode of The Ghost Furnace. I am here with my friend Nick, Pennsylvania. How you doing, Nick?
I am doing real good. Got a happy new haircut, so I'm ready to face the day tomorrow.
It looks good. You guys can't see, but I promise it is a fine haircut. But we really want to thank you all for joining us this evening. We have a few things for you, but before we get to that, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping. Want to thank folks for everyone who's kind of reached out recently. We've had a lot of feedback from people, just, kind words here and there. And again, that really does help us just, not only stay motivated, but it helps us direct, kind of where the podcast is going and this kinds of content that we want to share with everyone. If you are someone who does like our podcast, please tell a friend that is into this kind of stuff. The more people we have listening, the more stories that will hopefully be shared with us and we can in turn share with you guys. And, rating, reviewing, sharing, all those things really do go a long way to help us reach, a larger audience. That's something we're always trying to get better here. And a big part of that can be helped by you guys. So again, just wanted to thank everyone for everything that they've done for us recently. And we hope to continue our we've been on a little bit of a hot streak here in October, getting an episode out pretty much every week because it is the spooky season and there's a lot on our minds. We have a few thoughts and stories for you guys this evening. We have some other things on the docket for later in the month, but you'll just have to stick around and see what those are. Nick, I know you have, I think, some feedback or some thoughts from someone to share first.
Yeah, I definitely want to thank again our friend Heidi for turning us on to the Stoneman Willie topic that we discussed in the previous episode, that being episode 61. And I heard, I read some comments that we got, and I also got some friends and acquaintances sent some stuff. Our friend Chris, in fact, talked about it, saying he really enjoyed how totally aghast you were about the whole thing, by the way. You specifically.
Yeah, apparently. Yeah, no, I heard that from more than one person. So I don't know if it's just my delicate sensibilities, apparently, or what when it comes to treatment of corpses. But yeah, every time you got to a new point in that story, I almost couldn't believe it,
Chris thinks that you were missing some context of the time and you're being disturbed. And back then people died way easier and younger, and there was plenty, quote, and there were plenty of more important things going on, like the Civil War, and people were just used to that being way more cavalier about death.
Right. No, and I think Chris is absolutely correct there. There is definitely a bit of chronocentrism going on my part. And you're right. I mean, culturally it is different. I don't know if I would have I probably would have had a different take on the whole thing if I would have been around back then.
Well, and one of the things that I have heard said as well is this was kind of the dawn, really, of modern funereal practices. I don't know if I said that during the episode, but it was pointed out to me as well that this was kind of cutting edge. This may have been regarded as a humane thing to do. I don't know about that. But Chris also said that he looked at pictures of the funeral procession, and the hearse was a motorified motorcycle. And so he is not shocked at all that it overheated.
So that's a little bit of context Chris is adding there that we didn't have last week.
No.
Yeah, maybe if you look at it, you go, oh, I see why that thing had a problem.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't look to see how modified it was, but I'm going to have to. So yeah, I had a couple things. There was another question that was directed at me that I'm actually going to address a little bit later. But before I do, I have something like a call to action. Lately, I have gotten right back into the shortwave. I made a couple antennas recently, not big antennas, but just little whip antennas that I can circle around the room and enjoy myself in the evenings. I know I got you into listening to the shortwave a few years back. And actually, one of my little receivers that I have right here is the same one that you picked up, and I got an old Sony one and an old Hallicrafters one, and I've been sitting in my library these past few evenings, and I've been really enjoying a couple stations in particular and a show in particular. I'm going to get to that in a sec. I kind of wish I had invited our friend Brian here, because not only have we not had Brian on in almost a criminal, we really are. We need to get him back. But Brian is actually an licensed amateur radio operator. You didn't know that?
I did. Dude just keeps getting cooler every time I hear a fact about him. Okay. I'm not surprised. I just didn't know that. Yeah.
When working with him many years ago, that was one of the first like real conversations we had, because I was so interested, and he's like, you should get your license. They just, at that time, they had just dropped the requirement to have some working proficiency with Morse code in order to pass. I never got that deep, just because I just don't have the time to dedicate it to it properly, but I still love listening to the shortwave.
Same. Yep.
And as a kid, I had an old Hallicrafters kit, and I really enjoyed it. I know a lot of us who would hang out at my house late at night would listen to some weird programs, and shortwave radio is really this wonderful, odd little thing. It's still very viable, especially in places like Australia and Africa and South America, the American West and the Canadian Plains. And it really runs the gamut. There's a lot of religious programming. There's a lot of foreign. There's a lot of specialty stuff. There's a lot of truly bizarre things. But I've been listening to broadcasts 60 meters at 5,950 kilohertz out of Okeechobee, Florida. On the weekends, they have been like relaying a signal for some Scandinavian pop music programs, which are phenomenal, because they play like a lot of jump blues. And there was somebody had a whole like David Bowie night where it was only covers of David Bowie, and it was David Bowie covers by groups I never heard some of these, and there's a lot of them are American, and we dig deep, but some of these cats out in Europe dig really deep, especially some of this jump blues stuff I was listening to, and it was killer that, and a lot of old soul, northern soul, really big over there. But I've been enjoying that. But there's another program I need to talk about. Yes. Now, I think I've told you about this. Have you listened to it yet?
No, I actually need to get new batteries. Wasting your life. I know. You mentioned that a week or so ago, and I'm like, I need to get new batteries. And
here's my call to action, and I'll explain it. There's a half-hour long show, and it's either broadcasting out of Lubbock, Texas, or Snowflake, Arizona, depending on where he's at the time. The guy's name is UFO Joe, and it is the Your UFO Show with UFO Joe. It's only half an hour. It might be the highest achievement that radio has ever made. And this is not me joking around. Like, I really think this is a great show. But when I explain it, it's going to sound like I'm joking, but I'm really not. Right. Basically, the guy comes on and he announces he's going to open up the phone lines in about 5 minutes. It's a lot of bumper music. Half the program is bluegrass bumper music.
That's not too bad. Okay.
It's not too bad. No, it's not. And he comes on and he says the phone number, and the last 10 minutes he gets callers generally. Now, I've already called him once. I'm planning on calling in again tonight. Yeah. And between the bumpers, between giving out the number, he talks about the prices of gas in different places. He stresses he will talk to you about anything. The only thing that's off limits is politics. And you know what? Fine. I'm cool with that. Yeah. So I really want people to tune into this guy, and more importantly, call into this guy, talk UFOs, talk weird stuff, because he does seem like a genuinely really nice guy. Right. And his show is only half an hour long, and I want it to be successful because on shortwave, there's different freedoms allotted to you. You can listen to it online as well, but there really is a beauty about shortwave broadcasting and receiving, and I love everything about this show because part of what I love radio, and my family is well and annoyed by I have the AM on or I have the shortwave on almost a constant thing in my life. And what pains me, and I think I've said this in conversation with you before, is like, when did every single commercial on the radio turn into being just scams? One scam after another, one false product after another, one bogus claim after another. And also just the homogenizing effect that monopolistic radio empires have had.
Right.
We've talked about some of the local radio stations here. What is, because in the little city that I'm in, about 15,000 people, we have a media group that runs 3 different radio stations, and they do a really great job. Like, the rock station plays the B-sides, and they have a lot of very specific local content, including local music.
Right.
That's the strength. Shortwave radio has becoming kind of atrophying, at least in the Anglosphere. And it's a shame, because there can be so much weirdness. There can be, again, this real freedom, because these programs that are on WMRI, this is out of Okeechobee, or WBCQ, which is in Maine, about 1 mile from the New Brunswick border, which I'm pulling up your UFO show. They are commercial radio stations, but the people who have programs on these stations are paying for the airtime themselves. So it's like donation based. That's why this guy's show is only half an hour. And I want to see more. The buzzword right now is diversity. I really want to see more diversity in what sort of conversations in entertainment we have, because the homogenizing effect that mass media has had on the American, and by therefore the global society, has really stunted, and it does us all a disservice. And yeah, I'm in it for the weird things.
Well, right.
But that's just because that's where I'm at.
Right. No, but I think for the kind of stuff that we're at, like, obviously we like the stranger things, but I think that has we see this in the paranormal community, and we have, I think, a lot seen it in the last, 10, 15 years with the rise of paranormal TV shows, but also paranormal podcasts and things like that. The popularity of paranormal podcasts, just like, this radio program, kind of democratize a lot of the stories, and it gives almost everyone a platform. Very low barrier to entry that didn't happen before. So as a result, you get more and more stories, and you get more and more ideas flowing around that maybe wouldn't have flowed around otherwise if they were attached to, like, a major TV station or something like that. So I think shows like the one you're talking about are fascinating, because it kind of reminds me of, how Coast to Coast used to be, and how
100%.
And it's just because how many times, if you listen to Coast, just like a lot of podcasts these days, and I'm sure like this radio show, where you might hear in 1 half hour, you might hear a story that is completely mundane and just like, you're not sure why it's even there. You might hear another story that sounds so crazy there's no way it's true. And then you hear a third story that scares the crap out of you and makes you really change how you think about things. You need to have that variety. It can't all be like, we can't just curate the stories we want to hear. And I know we're kind of beating a dead horse with this, but this is why we like authors like Thomas White and other people we've talked about can bring that perspective in an academic forum. And that's great, because that's what it's for. But if you're just having people telling stories, you need to have that kind of campfire element that is perpetuated by radio shows like the one you're talking about, podcasts, and things of that nature.
And also to avoid falling into the trap, there's one thing that where a large company will try to homogenize things. I know we used to laugh because I and a couple of our friends worked at Subway, and that was the time when Subway was trying to unify all the stores to make it. And the corporate came in and they did say, hey, when you walk into a McDonald's anywhere in America, it's always going to be exactly the same. You're going to get the exact same thing. And we used to laugh because how many olives go on a foot-long sub? 8. It's supposed to be like buttons on a snowman, is how the woman described it. And
That's funny.
don't like that. I mean, I've talked about this before. Like, when I'm on the road, I really do try not to go. I will go to anything but a chain, with rare exception, because it's a cowardice. There's obviously large media makers, they're going to chase whatever the hot thing is, and they're going to create a formula, and they're going to stick to that formula. And that's how you're going to get paranormal shows like the one on Animal Planet, where it's just people telling their ghost stories with the close-up Max Headroom, you know, sort of. And they are going to justify being on Animal Planet because at least at one point they'll mention that the people have pets, and it's just absurd, and it just waters the whole thing down. It oversaturates. They shove so much of it down your throat that you lose a thing for it. But there's also when, you know, we could fall into a formula ourselves of
for sure
tracking, like, well, what gets people listening? And I really, really believe that anybody that's going to just try to be as real with themselves, like, who are you? What is the Mingus thing? Like, the genius is the one most like himself. You might hit a wall and do the same thing, do something very honest, and no one listens. I think there's more. I think there's pride in that, as opposed to chasing after a thing. So yes, there's media can be co-opted and homogenized by moneyed interest, but we can also fall into those traps ourselves, and so don't want to do that. So I love this. I love the strange things, even the political conversation. It's just, there's so much out there, and it's a disservice even under the guise of verifying what's true and not. It's because who is the arbiter of that? And I just worry about a lot of these things. No,
that's why I mean, you used the word diversity earlier. That's why you need to be conscious of, I think, that when you're picking out what you're listening to and what is available to people. But I think that it's even simpler than that in some ways, when it's just, it should be available to everybody, and it can serve any purpose and have any motivation, you know, like again, if you have stories that, like, I mean, look at Jim Harold's Campfire, that podcast. It's literally just people calling in and telling spooky stories, you know, and it's a formula. It works really well, you know.
And we should presume competence on the listeners, that you can discern, you know, truth from fiction and whatnot, because even with all the safeguards against that, you are going to still get people that believe crazy things without the benefit of any evidence, any supporting evidence.
Right. You know, I think that's why when it comes to, like, especially a lot of the folklore that we talk about on this show, we're into this stuff because it tells us things about ourselves, about society, about history, about where we've been, where we're going. And that sounds hyperbolic, but, like, I think it's true. That's what keeps us coming back. Just for clarity, when we're doing this podcast, there is, like, we might be trying to decide, what do we want to talk about? But it's a matter of focusing. We're never going to run out of things to talk about, and we're never not going to be passionate about this stuff.
Right.
You know? And I hope listeners, you know, feel that way as well, you know?
And this actually comes around to the story I wanted to share today. And it's a personal story, but, you know, and I don't believe I've ever shared it here. If I have, I've given a very brief statement.
Okay.
As we have said on this a number of times, these conversations that we have between Bond and I, and between our friends who we have on, and between interesting people, authors, and other people in this kind of community, we didn't start this. This is all the idea of our friend Mike. And Mike brought you in because you just enjoy the topics and wanted some guidance on how to do this, and you have that background. And he specifically asked me, because even though I love the stories, I've always been very clear that I don't really buy into much of it, right?
Yeah, I always refer to you as a hopeful skeptic.
I can take that. Yeah.
I think he's very passionate about this stuff. So that's, you know, I mean,
well, anything I'm going to sit down and talk about, for more than 10 minutes, I'm probably pretty passionate about. I love too much. I love too much, and that leads to having very strong opinions about it. But I tried to be not one of those people that feels like they need to have an opinion about everything.
For sure.
I really don't. There's very few things I actually care at all about, but those things that I do, ooh,
watch out.
Watch out. So I was actually asked, you talk about skepticism, or you act skeptical about a lot of these stories, and yet you say, you're open to it, and why or what keeps you open to it was the paraphrasing the question. And so I feel like this might be one of those almost like religious type things where somebody has a personal revelation,
right,
and they believe based on that, and that might be enough for them, but it doesn't help the person that didn't have that revelation. And I had one experience that still is very weird to me. And I'm just going to go, it's like I said, it's a personal story. I believe it was what I thought it was? I don't know. I don't think so, but it was just too strange, and it stuck with me. And if I have any sort of like real bona fide experience, it was this. And basically the story goes, and the person involved, there was one of the most important people in my life died. This was back in December of 2009. December of 2010. Okay. He had passed away. An older person, not old, but he was middle-aged, and very much a mentor figure, very important. That's as mushy as I'm going to get about it, because I didn't really even understand how pivotal, how seminal this person was in my life until after he was gone.
Right.
But he died, and it did rock me a bit.
For sure.
A lot of bit. But about a week after he died, I remember laying in bed, and it was very early in the morning. The sky was just starting to become a silver gray. And I remember looking half awake into the corner of the room and thinking like, oh, he's there in the corner. He's just standing there in the corner, and he's going to leave momentarily. And there was no fear. There wasn't anything like that. It was a matter of fact thing. It's just like, I know he's there. It's still too dark to see anything, but I feel like I can feel him there. I can kind of see him there. Now, in fairness, I am the guy that once, while half awake, was convinced that I was a city block and that my head was a corner bar. That also happened, but more years before. But I really did feel like, oh, he's there, and I knew he's just on his way out, and he's just stopping by. That was it.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, that alone, I would wake up from, get some tea in me, get moving for the day, and say like, that was very nice. That was me coming to terms with all of this.
You thought that was you just project? That was just natural.
If it weren't for another thing that happened,
okay, yeah.
And I still think like, that's what it is. At the very least, that's what it is.
Yeah,
that's right. My brain, my psyche, allowing this loss, justifying it, and coming to terms with it. But later that same day, not real late in the morning, after cleaning up after breakfast, and my wife said, damnedest thing, I felt like he was in the room. I hadn't told her about it. It's not, and that is the one experience. Like, she felt like he was in the room that morning, and it really kind of, how do you explain that?
Right.
And
again, we've said this 1,000 times. I'll say it 1,000 more times. Like, we get caught up, I think, in the mechanism of asking, okay, what is really, being critical of what is really, quote unquote, really going on. And in a case like this, like, I think you're right. Like, first off, I think that, that's a beautiful story. And I think that having that that kind of exterior validation from your wife, the natural step is to hear them go, oh, then we were both experiencing the same thing. The question that begs is was this person's spirit really there or not? Or was it internal to you guys? And before we even go down that path, part of me wants just to be clear that, like, regardless of which of those two outcomes it is, like whether he was there or whether it was just both of you guys having the same impression, I think that's still a really cool and intense thing that doesn't change the effect that it had on you. I
agree with that.
Yeah. And I think that, like, I mean, we've talked about this before, and this comes up a lot in a lot of paranormal stuff where this is stuff that's either coming from us or it is out there, and we get caught up in that and we worry about it. And I think that the experience is what we should be concentrating on, because if it is something that's happening that you're creating, if it's coming from you, not something that's exterior and in the world, that is, like, if your brain can do that and trick both of you guys into thinking that there is a presence in the room just for the purpose of your brain knowing it needs to help both of you heal from a loss, that's incredible. That is super cool. And it shows the depths of the human condition and the human brain and body and soul. There's so much there. Even if the mundane answer is the correct one. So
I never put it into those words, but that I feel like that was an idea that was kind of in my head in one way or another, but I had never taken the time or so naturally came to the wording it that way. Right. But I completely agree. It's obviously she's feeling deep sympathy. This is a person she didn't really know. She met a couple times, but clearly having a lot of sympathy for me in that situation.
Right.
One of the things I did wonder, though, it doesn't take away from the strangeness that we would both on that one morning, early in the morning, have that same feeling, and then not triggered by my saying anything about it, have her come up and tell me about it. But so that's still going to be exceptional. But what I do wonder is this a common experience that as you're waking up, you feel like somebody you've lost is there in the room? I imagine it's not unlike the sleep paralysis stuff. Not the same thing, but a similar experience that we're working with. I don't know what you think about that.
So that makes me think of two things. One, just to kind of relay a personal story. I don't know if I've ever talked about this in this podcast because it sounds just kind of like your story. It sounds crazy, but this is what happened. There's been more than one occasion that I have and actually it's happened more that I've heard than seen. I had a cat that I had for 18 years that it passed away in 2020. And there have been, I'd say, half a dozen really stark moments where I heard the cat or saw the cat. And it's really weird. I don't have a good explanation for it. It feels weird to even say that because, like what you said with your story, that's pretty, like, it's pretty strange. It's pretty strange.
I had never you've never told me about this, and I remember that cat well. I remember it used to beg for hugs, and it would wrap its arms around your leg. It would stand up and wrap its forearms around your leg, and cat. Murph was a good cat, and I miss him a lot. The thing that's interesting about that, and related to your story, is every time that it happened, there was never a question of, is this real or is it there? It just, just like you said, this person is in the room. You're not questioning it at the time. It's just, you just have the interaction. It doesn't seem weird at the time, and it's not until a few moments later that you're like, oh. And so what I'm saying is I've had those experiences too. And I know how strange it feels to even share those stories. Cause and this is why, again, I believe a lot of people that have crazier stories than what me and you just relayed, it feels really weird and really, vulnerable, embarrassing, whatever, to say that out loud and say, yeah, this is just what happened.
that's a strange thing. And what your story reminds me of with the how you're interpreting at the time, especially with you and your wife, having the same interaction. This is a idea that I got from Tim Renner, part of Strange Familiars, but I don't think he came up with the idea. I think he got it from a psychologist or maybe even something culturally somewhere. But the idea of big dreams and little dreams, and it's the idea that like whenever you're having a dream that is, really meaningful, or it's someone interacting with you, or there is a quote unquote like a paranormal element to it, it feels different. And you can like your brain immediately knows the difference between whether it is a small dream, which is just like the rumblings of the day, versus like something that is an important interaction. And I think that like, even if this was just a shared, which again, that's crazy to begin with too. If this was a shared dream that you guys both had, it was definitely one of the big variety.
And it's still an amazing thing if that is.
Yeah. Even if it's not someone externally coming to visit you, either way, it's crazy.
Completely agree.
I don't mean crazy in like a negative way. Crazy as in a
like crazy, amazing, extraordinary. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yes.
So the funny thing to me was that had that, but again, this was within a week of him dying.
Mm-hmm.
The day he died, I had to leave. I had to go way up north to Bradford, Pennsylvania, right along.
Right.
Bradford's up there by the New York line.
Mm-hmm.
And I took a guitar to the hotel with me, well, the motel, because I said to myself, if I'm going to see a ghost ever, I'm going to be ready. Because if I see Bob, I want to be ready with a guitar, or something that makes noise. And obviously, had no experience up there in Bradford, but. Yeah, I remember that. And then just a few days later that morning, I knew he was there. I knew he was there in the corner. I could kind of see him, and it was that was that. But short story for you that I find really funny, really similar. Right. I think I had told you that we went out to Michigan earlier in the summer to visit with my aunt and uncle.
Oh, yeah.
Did I tell you their ghost story?
No, you said there was a ghost story, and you would share it with me. But
I never shared it. Oh my god! Well, this is the perfect time.
Yeah.
So my aunt, her grandfather had. Well, let me back up a little bit. They were out west visiting her brother in Colorado, and they were staying in his basement, which had no windows at all. So it was like being in a cave.
Right.
When the lights were out. Her grandfather had died just a few days before. I think that may have had some part of why they were out there, but I can't remember that.
Mm-hmm.
At one point in the middle of the night, my uncle had to get up and use the bathroom. And so he's making his way through the pitch black, full blackness of this basement. And he gets to the bathroom because there's a little tiny sliver under the door of light. Okay. But he's trying to get back and he can't see anything. And he's not even like lifting his feet. He's just kind of shuffling. Right. So that if he bumps anything, it doesn't hurt. And he finds it and he's calling out my aunt's name. Laurie.
Oh my gosh.
He's trying to find where the bed is.
Right.
But at one point she just hears this and hears her name being whispered. And apparently she threw the blankets over her head and said, "No, Grandpa, go away."
I don't blame her.
It's funny though. But yeah, the hiding under the blanket thing, I never understood.
Well, the hiding under the blanket, I mean, I think that's probably just like a vestigial reaction. Yeah, because it doesn't make any sense, but neither does the whole situation, So,
well, if you hide under the blanket and you would like to share us detailed story about your blanket hiding experiences, how do people get a hold of us?
You can find us on Instagram or Facebook, or if you would like to just reach out via email, you can reach us at theghostfurnacepodcast@gmail.com.
And again, we really do. It means the world to us when you reach out with these questions, and it really does help promote kind of where we go and what we talk about. And we love to hear your stories. And again, check out the Your UFO show. It's wonderful weirdness. Very nice guy. He needs more callers. He needs more airtime. So this is my call to action. Good night, all.